What happens when the life you meticulously built turns out to be a house of cards? He had it all: a thriving career, a stunning apartment, and a fiancée so perfect she was practically a work of art. He'd left his quiet, unassuming ex-wife behind for this new, shiny life, convinced he'd made the ultimate upgrade. But one shocking headline, one name from his past, splashed across the society pages next to a billionaire, changes everything. This isn't just a story about love and loss. It's about the terrifying moment you realize the person you threw away might have been the only real thing you ever had. Alex Russo believed life was a structure you built, not something that happened to you. Every beam had to be measured, every joint seamless. At 38, he surveyed his creation from the 34th floor of his Lincoln Park apartment and felt the deep, satisfying hum of a job well done. The Chicago skyline glittered back at him, a sprawling testament to ambition, a mirror to his own. His fiancée, Chloe Sterling, was the keystone of this structure. Tonight she was hosting a dinner party, and she moved through their minimalist, art-filled living space like a ballerina. She was all sharp, elegant angles and soft, calculated smiles. Her dress, a slip of emerald silk, clung to a figure honed by Pilates and discipline. She was, in a word, perfect. "Darling," she murmured, her hand grazing his lower back as she passed. "The Gallaghers are just raving about the caterer." Her voice was a low, melodic hum, the kind that made powerful men lean in. "You picked them, Chloe. Your taste is impeccable," Alex replied, squeezing her hand. It felt like the right thing to say, the line scripted for this scene. He was a senior partner at a prestigious architecture firm, and Chloe was a PR maven for luxury brands. They were a power couple, a brand unto themselves. Their friends, the Gallaghers and the Chengs, were cut from the same cloth: lawyers, surgeons, finance guys. The conversation was a smooth cocktail of market trends, Hamptons rentals, and charity galas. This was the life he had chosen. This was the life he had left Elena for. The thought of his ex-wife surfaced unbidden, a ghost at the feast. Elena Vance. Dr. Elena Vance, he corrected himself, though he rarely used her title. She was a child psychologist, a profession he'd once found noble but later saw as small. Her world was one of frayed carpets in community clinics, finger paintings, and endless patience for problems that couldn't be solved with a blueprint. Their marriage had been comfortable, quiet, and, he'd eventually decided, utterly devoid of ambition. It was a starter home, and he was ready for a skyscraper. The divorce had been civil but firm. He told her he needed more. He never specified what more was, but Chloe was its living embodiment. Chloe understood the importance of networking, of projecting success. Elena had found his work events draining. Chloe thrived in them, collecting business cards and compliments with equal grace. "Alex, you're a million miles away," Michael Cheng said, swirling the deep red in his wine glass. "Thinking about that new museum pitch?" Alex snapped back to the present. "Something like that. It's a beast." He launched into a confident explanation of the project, feeling the familiar rush of control. He was good at this. He could command a room, sell a vision. Later, as they were clearing the last of the crystal glasses, Chloe leaned against the marble island, her perfect smile finally showing a hint of fatigue. "It went well," she stated. It wasn't a question. Chloe didn't deal in uncertainties. "Of course it did. You were magnificent." "The Gallaghers think we should join the yacht club." She was inspecting her manicure, a flawless nude. "It would be good for us, for your business." "Whatever you think is best, honey." He trusted her instincts implicitly. She was the social architect of their life, and her blueprints were flawless. He wrapped his arms around her waist, inhaling her expensive perfume. He felt a surge of, not exactly passion, but profound rightness. This was success. This was the pinnacle. He was standing at the top of the skyscraper he'd built, and the view was breathtaking. He had traded quiet comfort for dazzling brilliance, and he had never once looked back. As he drifted to sleep that night, the hum of the city a lullaby outside their floor-to-ceiling windows, a final fleeting image of Eleanor entered his mind. He remembered her laughing in their old overgrown garden in Evanston, dirt smudged on her cheek, her hair a messy bun. It was a soft, faded photograph from a life he no longer lived. He brushed it away like a cobweb. She was part of the foundation, buried deep beneath the gleaming steel and glass of his new reality. He was sure she was fine, living her quiet, small life. He hoped she was happy in her own way, but her happiness, or lack thereof, had no bearing on his. He was certain of that. He was an architect after all. He knew which walls were load-bearing and which could be torn down without a second thought. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't sent to him directly, but forwarded by his sister Sarah with the subject line, "Is this Elena?" Alex was in the middle of a design review, the air thick with the smell of coffee and the low murmur of his team debating the merits of brushed bronze versus matte black fixtures. He opened the email distractedly, expecting a family photo or a news article about their hometown. What he saw made the blueprints on the table blur. It was a link to a Forbes online feature. The headline was bold and uncompromising. Tech titan Julian Croft and Dr. Elena Vance announce 100 million children's mental health initiative. Below the headline was a photograph. It wasn't a paparazzi shot. It was a professional, polished portrait. A man with kind eyes and a salt and pepper beard stood with his arm around a woman. The man was Julian Croft, the reclusive, almost mythical founder of Omnicore, a man whose net worth was discussed in the same hushed tones as a nation's GDP. The woman was Elena. But it wasn't the Elena he remembered. The Elena in the photo was radiant. Her hair, which she used to pull back haphazardly, was styled in soft, sophisticated waves. She wore a simple but elegant navy blue dress that highlighted a confidence he had never seen in her. There was no trace of the harried, slightly apologetic woman he had left. The look in her eyes was direct, clear, and serene. She looked powerful. Alex read the first paragraph, his heart beginning to pound a strange, discordant rhythm against his ribs. Julian Croft, the visionary behind Omnicore, has long been a quiet force in philanthropy. But today, he steps into the spotlight with his partner, Dr. Elena Vance, a leading developmental psychologist, to launch the Vanguard Initiative. The foundation aims to revolutionize pediatric mental health care access across the country. "This isn't my project," Croft stated in an exclusive interview. "This is Elena's vision. I'm just the guy lucky enough to help build the scaffolding." His partner, Elena's vision. Alex felt a wave of vertigo, as if the floor had tilted beneath his feet. He scrolled down, past quotes from Elena discussing systemic challenges and innovative therapeutic models, her language sharp and academic. The article mentioned her recent publications, her guest lectures at the University of Chicago. It painted a portrait of a woman at the absolute peak of her profession, a woman he didn't recognize at all. "Alex, we need your sign-off on the lighting schematics," his junior Mark said, pulling him from the digital abyss. "Give me a minute," Alex snapped, his voice harsher than intended. He walked out of the conference room and into his glass-walled office, shutting the door. He leaned against it, pulling at the knot of his tie, which suddenly felt like a noose. His mind raced, a chaotic jumble of denial and confusion. Julian Croft? The man was practically royalty in the tech world. How? When? Elena hated those circles. She despised the posturing, the talk of valuations and burn rates. She was the one who read poetry and tended to a vegetable garden. A cold, ugly thought slithered into his mind. She's a gold digger. It was a base, defensive instinct, and he seized it. It had to be that. She had somehow schemed her way into this. But as he looked at the photo again, at the genuine warmth between her and Croft, the explanation felt hollow. Eleanor wasn't a schemer. She was the most earnest person he had ever known. And Croft's quote, "This is Eleanor's vision. It wasn't about his money, it was about her work. The work Alex had dismissed as small. The office door opened and Chloe breezed in, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I was in the neighborhood and thought my brilliant fiancé needed a pick-me-up," she chirped, her smile perfectly bright. She set the coffee on his desk and then noticed his screen. "What's this?" She leaned in, her perfume enveloping him. Her eyes scanned the headline. Her smile didn't falter, but it froze, becoming something brittle and sharp. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Is that your Elena?" She said the name as if it were a foreign object in her mouth. "It is," Alex said, his voice flat. Chloe was silent for a long moment, her perfectly manicured finger tapping on his desk. She wasn't looking at Elena. She was looking at Julian Croft. Alex could almost see the calculations happening behind her crystalline blue eyes, the net worth, the social capital, the sheer scale of it all. "Well," she said finally, her voice tight with an emotion he couldn't quite place. It wasn't shock or sympathy. It was something closer to annoyance. "I suppose even a broken clock is right twice a day." She straightened up, smoothing her skirt. "Don't let it get to you, darling. It's a flash in the pan. We have the Architectural Guild Gala on Friday. I've already confirmed our table with the Vanderbilts. That's what matters." She blew him a kiss and walked out, leaving him alone with the glowing screen. A flash in the pan, the Vanderbilts. She had processed the information not as a human event, but as a strategic challenge on a social chessboard. He stared at Elena's picture, at the woman who was supposed to be a quiet footnote in his grand life story. She had just hijacked the entire narrative, and for the first time in years, Alex Russo, the master architect, felt like he had no idea what the blueprint was anymore. The news of Elena and Julian Croft rippled through their social circle with the speed of a stock market crash. It wasn't overt. It was a series of subtle, unnerving shifts. It was the way people's eyes lingered on him a second too long at the country club. It was the forced brightness in their voices when they asked, "So have you seen what your ex is up to? How wonderful for her." Each mention was a paper cut. Alex found himself bracing for it in every conversation. He and Chloe were at a gallery opening in the West Loop, a chic, industrial space filled with the city's elite. Chloe was in her element, a vision in black, seamlessly navigating the crowd. Alex, however, felt like he was wearing an ill-fitting suit. "Alex, my boy!" It was Arthur Vance, a senior banking executive and a man Alex had always been keen to impress. "Just saw the news about your ex-wife. Astounding. Julian Croft is a game-changer. She's done terribly well for herself." He clapped Alex on the shoulder, a gesture that felt less like camaraderie and more like pity. "Yes, it's great news," Alex managed to say, his smile feeling like a cheap mask. "You must be so proud," Arthur's wife Margaret chimed in, her eyes twinkling with insincere sympathy. Proud. The word lodged in his throat. He wasn't proud. He was something else. A complex, toxic cocktail of emotions he couldn't name. Resentment, bewilderment, and a strange, possessive anger he had no right to feel. She was his quiet, unassuming ex-wife. How dare she become this person without his permission? Chloe rescued him, steering him away with a polite excuse about needing to speak to the gallery owner. "Stop letting it get to you," she hissed under her breath, her grip on his arm surprisingly tight. "You look like a wounded puppy. It's a bad look." "It's not that simple, Chloe." "It is. You chose me. You won. This is nothing more than a statistical anomaly," she said, her logic as sharp and cold as the champagne flute in her hand. "Now go talk to Robert Miller about the Lake Forest project. Look confident." He did as he was told, but the conversation with Robert felt hollow. All he could think about was Chloe's reaction. There was no empathy, no understanding of the complex history he shared with Elena. There was only brand management, their brand, Alex and Chloe, the perfect couple. And Elena had just thrown a rock through their perfectly curated window display. The cracks started to show in other places. A few days later, they were having brunch at a trendy restaurant Chloe loved. Alex was trying to discuss a major setback at work. A zoning issue was threatening to delay his museum project by months. And the city council is being completely intractable, he was saying, looking for some support. Chloe wasn't listening. She was scrolling through her phone, her brow furrowed. "Did you see this?" she said, turning the screen toward him. It was an Instagram post from a prominent Chicago socialite. A picture of her and Elena clinking glasses at what looked like a private luncheon. The caption read, "So inspired by the brilliant Dr. Elena Vance and her incredible work. Honored to support the Vanguard initiative." "She's everywhere," Chloe muttered, a venom in her tone that startled him. "She's being courted by the entire charity board, the one I've been trying to get on for a year." "Chloe, I'm talking about my project, the biggest project of my career," Alex said, his frustration boiling over. "It's falling apart." She finally looked up, her blue eyes impatient. "Darling, problems get solved. It's what you do. But this," she gestured to her phone, "is a public relations crisis. Our engagement party is in 3 weeks. We need to control the narrative. We need to make sure our story is bigger than hers." He stared at her. She wasn't his partner. She was his publicist. He had a gaping wound, and she was offering him a press release as a bandage. For the first time, he wondered what a conversation like this would have been like with Elena. She would have listened. She would have put her hand on his, her brow creased with genuine concern. She would have asked questions, made him a cup of tea, and reminded him of that other time he'd faced a crisis and overcome it. She was a psychologist, after all. Her entire life was about listening to people's problems. He had traded that for this. For a woman who saw his crisis as an inconvenient distraction from her social climbing. That night, sleep offered no escape. He dreamt of their old house in Evanston. He was trying to show Chloe the blueprints for his new life, the gleaming skyscraper he'd designed. But the pages were blank. He looked up and saw Elena in the garden. She wasn't looking at him. She was talking to Julian Croft, and with every word she spoke, the garden grew more vibrant, the flowers blooming in impossible colors. Meanwhile, the foundation of his skyscraper was crumbling into sand. He woke up in a cold sweat. Chloe was sleeping soundly beside him, her breathing even and slow. She looked like a marble statue in the pale moonlight, beautiful and untouchable. He felt an overwhelming sense of alienation, a loneliness so profound it was like a physical ache in his chest. He had told everyone, including himself, that Chloe was perfect. But perfection, he was beginning to realize, was cold and sterile. It didn't leave room for messy human things like fear or doubt, or the ghost of a past you thought you had successfully buried. And his past was not only unburied, it was hosting charity luncheons and being toasted by the city's elite. The inevitable finally happened 2 weeks before the engagement party. Alex was at a fundraiser for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, an event Chloe had insisted they attend. It was a sea of black ties and sequins held in the opulent grand foyer of the Symphony Hall. He was standing alone for a moment, having just escaped a conversation about sailing, when he saw her. Elena was across the room near the grand staircase, deep in conversation with a woman he recognized as a major patron of the arts. Julian Croft was not with her. She was alone, yet she didn't look it. She looked completely self-possessed, holding her own with a quiet grace that drew people in. She was wearing a simple, floor-length, garnet-colored gown. It wasn't flashy, but on her it was stunning. She looked healthier, happier. The perpetual flicker of anxiety he remembered in her eyes was gone, replaced by a calm, steady light. His heart did a painful, complicated lurch. It was like seeing a familiar landmark after a devastating earthquake. The shape was the same, but everything around it, the entire landscape, was irrevocably changed. He felt an irrational urge to hide, but it was too late. As if sensing his gaze, she turned her head and their eyes met across the crowded room. For a heartbeat, the noise of the gala faded away. He saw a flicker of surprise in her expression, but it was quickly replaced by a cool, polite neutrality. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, then turned back to her conversation. It was a clear dismissal, a courteous acknowledgement of a former acquaintance. It stung more than any angry outburst could have. He didn't know what propelled him, whether it was ego or a desperate need to understand, but he found himself walking towards her. The journey across the marble floor felt like miles. When he reached her, she was concluding her conversation. The other woman drifted away, and they were alone. "Elena," he said. Her name felt strange on his tongue. "Alex," she replied, her voice even. It was the same voice, but the melody was different. The tentative, questioning note was gone. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Chloe's on the event committee," he explained, the words feeling clumsy. "You look, well." It was a pathetic understatement. She looked incandescent. "Thank you. So do you." There was no bitterness in her voice, just observation. It was unnerving. He was prepared for anger, for tears, for awkwardness. He was not prepared for this serene composure. "I saw the article, the foundation," he stammered. "It's incredible. Congratulations." "Thank you. It's been a lot of work, but it's the most important work I've ever done." She spoke about it with a passion he hadn't seen in her since they were in their 20s, back when she was just starting her practice and believed she could change the world, one child at a time. He realized with a jolt that he had slowly smothered that fire in her with his own ambition, dismissing her dreams as quaint while trumpeting his own. I had no idea you were pursuing it on that scale," he admitted. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "There was a lot you had no idea about, Alex." The statement hung in the air between them, sharp and true. "You saw what you wanted to see." He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he couldn't. She was right. He had put her in a box labeled comfortable, unambitious wife, and had never bothered to look inside again. "Where's Julian?" he asked, instantly regretting the question. It sounded jealous. "He's in Zurich for a conference. He wanted to be here, but he's trusting me to represent the foundation." She said it so matter-of-factly. There was no need to impress him, no insecurity. Just then, Chloe appeared at his side, her smile a dazzling territorial display. "Darling, there you are. Oh." She looked at Elena, her eyes sweeping over her from head to toe in a swift, dismissive appraisal. "Elena, what a surprise." "Chloe," Elena said, her composure unwavering. "Good to see you." "I'm sure it is," Chloe purred, linking her arm possessively through Alex's. "It must be so thrilling for you to be at an event like this. You and Julian are the talk of the town. It's very sudden." The implication was clear. You don't belong here. Elena didn't take the bait. "It's been a whirlwind," she agreed calmly, "but when you have a chance to do meaningful work, you take it. I'm sure you understand." The subtle barb hit its mark. Chloe's smile tightened. "Well, we must be going. The mayor is expecting us," Chloe said, pulling on Alex's arm. "So lovely to see you again." As they walked away, Alex risked a glance back. Eleanor was already engaged in a new conversation, laughing at something a man was saying. She hadn't watched them leave. For her, the encounter was already over. "She's gotten smug," Chloe said, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "It's unbecoming." Alex didn't answer. He was replaying the conversation in his head. "There was a lot you had no idea about, Alex. You saw what you wanted to see." He looked at Chloe, at her perfectly coiffed hair, her diamond earrings, her relentless, strategic smile. He had seen what he wanted to see in her too, a symbol of success, a beautiful, polished accessory to his perfect life. He was only now beginning to realize that he had never bothered to look any deeper. He had traded a real woman for a flawless facade, and he was the only one who hadn't realized it was a terrible bargain. The engagement party was Chloe's masterpiece. Held at a private club overlooking the lake, it was a symphony of white roses, champagne fountains, and tastefully muted jazz. Everyone who mattered in their world was there, their collective wealth and influence creating a palpable buzz in the air. This was Chloe's answer to Elena's rise, a show of force, a declaration that she and Alex were still the premier couple, the ones to watch. Alex played his part. He smiled, he shook hands, he accepted congratulations with a practiced ease. But inwardly, he was fracturing. Every conversation felt like a performance. Every laugh felt hollow. He felt like an actor in a play he no longer understood, wearing a costume that was 2 sizes too tight. He found himself watching Chloe. She was mesmerizing, a flawless hostess gliding from one influential guest to another. But he saw it differently now. He saw the way her eyes darted around the room, constantly assessing, networking. He saw the way her smile never quite reached her eyes when she spoke to someone she deemed unimportant. He saw the transactional nature of every single interaction. The breaking point came midway through the evening. They were standing with Chloe's parents, a formidable couple who looked at Alex with the cool appraisal of investors checking on their portfolio. "I have to say, Chloe," her mother Eleanor said, "I was worried for a moment. All this news about Alex's first wife, it was becoming rather loud. But this party is the perfect response. It's put the narrative firmly back where it belongs." "Of course, Mother," Chloe said. "It was a simple matter of crisis management." Alex felt a surge of nausea. His life, his past, his divorce, all reduced to a PR problem to be managed. "It was hardly a crisis," Alex interjected, his voice tighter than he intended. All 3 of them turned to look at him, surprised. "Darling, don't be naive," Chloe said with a light, condescending laugh. "A woman of no background suddenly attached to one of the world's richest men. It reflects on you. It reflects on us. We had to remind people of your impeccable taste." She patted his chest. The condescension, the casual cruelty of her words, it was like a switch being flipped. The carefully constructed dam inside him broke. "Excuse us," he said, taking Chloe by the elbow and steering her firmly toward a secluded terrace overlooking the dark, churning waters of Lake Michigan. "Alex, what are you doing? I was talking to my parents," she hissed, yanking her arm away once they were outside. "Your mother called my life a narrative. You called my past a crisis management problem," he said, his voice low and trembling with a rage he hadn't known he possessed. "Is that all this is to you? A brand to be managed?" "Don't be so dramatic," she scoffed, wrapping her arms around herself. "This is the world we live in. Image is everything. I thought you understood that. It's why you're with me." The truth of that statement hit him like a physical blow. She was right. He had chosen her for her image, for what she represented. "And what if the image is cracking?" he shot back. "What if I'm cracking, Chloe? My museum project is on the verge of collapse. I'm being professionally humiliated, and all you can talk about is what table we're sitting at and how Elena's good fortune is making us look bad." "Your project will be fine. You're Alex Russo," she said dismissively. "And of course I'm concerned about how we look. Our entire life is built on perception. Don't you get it? The right perception gets you the best projects, the best club memberships, the best life. We are building an empire, Alex. Don't be a liability." Liability. The word hung in the cold night air. He wasn't her partner. He was an asset, and he was depreciating. "My God," he whispered, the realization dawning in its full, horrifying clarity. "You don't love me. You have no idea who I am." Chloe let out a short, bitter laugh. "I know exactly who you are. You're a brilliant architect who wanted a woman who could match his ambition and build a world with him. You left your mousy little wife because she couldn't do that. I can. I am. This," she gestured back at the glittering party, "is what you wanted. So don't you dare get sentimental on me now just because she won the lottery." He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The perfect features, the exquisite dress, the curated charm, it was all armor. Underneath was a ruthless strategist who saw love as a merger and marriage as an acquisition. He had been so blinded by the packaging that he had never bothered to check the contents. "That's where you're wrong," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "I didn't leave Elena because she wasn't ambitious. I left her because I was a coward. I was afraid my life wasn't going to be special enough, and I blamed her for it. But her life is special. It always was. I was just too blind and too arrogant to see it." Chloe's face, for the first time, lost its composure. A mask of cold fury settled over her features. "So what are you saying? You made a mistake?" The question hung between them, a precipice. The jazz music from the party seemed to mock them. He looked out at the dark lake, then back at the woman who was supposed to be his future. The skyscraper he thought they were building together was just a hollow facade, and a storm was coming. He didn't have an answer for her. Not yet. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the foundation of his perfect life had just crumbled to dust. The days after the engagement party were a study in glacial silence. Alex and Chloe moved around their apartment like two diplomats from warring nations, their conversations limited to terse, logistical necessities. The magnificent structure of their relationship had been revealed as a stage set, and neither of them knew how to act without the script. Alex felt like he was living in a fog. He went to work, sat in meetings, and stared at blueprints, but his mind was elsewhere. It was excavating the ruins of his marriage to Elena, trying to pinpoint the exact moment he had made such a catastrophic miscalculation. He needed to talk to someone who knew the before version of him, someone who had seen him with Elena. He called his sister Sarah. They met at a small, unassuming diner in her neighborhood, a place with worn vinyl booths and the smell of old coffee, a world away from Chloe's curated restaurants. Sarah, a practical, no-nonsense ER nurse, took one look at his face and said, "Good God, Alex, you look like hell." He gave a weak smile. "I feel like I'm in it." He told her everything. He confessed his shallow motivations for leaving Elena, his ego-driven pursuit of a perfect life with Chloe. He described the disastrous engagement party, Chloe's cold, strategic view of their relationship, and the unnerving encounter with the new, confident Elena. Sarah listened patiently, stirring her coffee. She had always liked Elena, a fact she'd never hidden. When he was finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You know," she said finally, "I never understood why you left her. I mean, I heard your reasons. You'd grown apart. You wanted different things. It all sounded like corporate jargon for a breakup." "I convinced myself it was true," Alex admitted, his voice hoarse. "I told myself she was holding me back, that her world was too small." "Her world wasn't small, Alex. It was deep," Sarah corrected him gently. "She was dealing with kids who'd seen things you can't even imagine. She was saving lives in her own way. You were building beautiful buildings, which is great, but she was rebuilding shattered children. Which one is smaller?" The question landed like a punch. He had never once thought of it that way. He'd measured her success by the square footage of her office and the prestige of her title, not by the impact of her work. "Remember that time you lost the bid for the waterfront project? About a year before you left her?" Sarah asked. Alex winced at the memory. It had been his first major solo project, and losing it had been a devastating blow to his ego. "Yeah, I was a wreck." "You were," Sarah agreed. "You moped around for weeks. But do you remember what Elena did? She didn't tell you to get over it or network harder. She researched the firm that won, found flaws in their design, and spent 2 weeks helping you put together a counter-proposal to the city council. It didn't work, but she poured everything she had into helping you, into believing in you when you didn't believe in yourself." He had completely forgotten that. The memory came rushing back with a shame so intense it burned. How could he have forgotten? He had been so consumed with his own failure that he had taken her monumental effort for granted. "She was your biggest champion, Alex," Sarah said, her voice soft. "And you traded her for a cheerleader who only cheers when you're winning." He slumped back in the booth, the cheap vinyl groaning in protest. "Chloe thinks Elena won the lottery." Maybe she did, Sarah said with a shrug. Or maybe this Julian Croft guy is just smart enough to see what you had all along and were too stupid to appreciate. Elena didn't just get lucky. She's brilliant, she's kind, she's dedicated. A guy like Croft, who can have anyone in the world, probably doesn't want a pretty sycophant. He wants a partner, someone real. Someone real. The phrase echoed what he had been feeling. Chloe was a performance. Elena was a person. He had been so dazzled by the performance that he'd forgotten the value of the person. "What do I do, Sarah?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I can't answer that, but you need to figure out what you actually want. Not what looks good on paper, not what will impress the Gallaghers or the Chengs. What do you, Alex Russo, the guy who used to build elaborate Lego cities in our basement, actually want for your life?" They sat in silence for a while longer, the diner's mundane chatter a backdrop to his internal reckoning. He thought about those Lego cities, the joy he'd found in creation for its own sake, not for applause. When had that changed? When had he started needing his life to be a monument to be admired from afar, rather than a home to be lived in? He left the diner feeling like a patient who had just received a terminal diagnosis for a disease he'd had for years without knowing. The disease was his own ego. His ambition had become a cancer, metastasizing and destroying everything good in its path. He drove home, not to the sterile, silent apartment in Lincoln Park, but to Evanston. He parked on the street outside the small brick house he had shared with Elena. Another family lived there now. A child's bicycle lay tipped over on the lawn. He could see lights on inside. He remembered the garden in the back, the one he'd always complained was too much work. He remembered Elena out there, patient and focused, coaxing life from the soil. She hadn't needed a billionaire to help her grow things. She had always known how. He was the one who had been living in barren ground. Returning to the apartment was like entering a museum exhibit of a life that was no longer his. Every object, the sleek Italian sofa, the abstract painting Chloe had insisted on, the crystal decanters on the bar cart, felt like a prop. Chloe was there, sitting in an armchair, bathed in the cool light of her laptop. She looked up when he entered, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," Alex said, his voice devoid of its usual authority. It was simply a statement of fact. She closed her laptop with a soft click. "I agree." She stood up, a graceful, fluid motion. "I've been doing some thinking. The party was unfortunate. Your behavior was unacceptable, but I'm willing to look past it. We need to present a united front. I've already drafted an announcement for our wedding date to release to the society pages. It will shift the focus back to us." He stared at her, astonished. She was still trying to manage the narrative. She hadn't heard a word he'd said on the terrace. She hadn't registered the earthquake, only the teacups rattling. "Chloe, stop," he said, holding up a hand. "Stop drafting, stop planning, stop managing, just listen." He took a deep breath. "This isn't working. We aren't working. We aren't partners, Chloe. We're co-branding a product, and I can't do it anymore." Her face remained perfectly composed, but a dangerous glint appeared in her eyes. "Don't be ridiculous, Alex. You're having a momentary lapse in judgment. You're emotional because your ex-wife got a lucky break." "No," he said, shaking his head. "My ex-wife got the life she deserves. This isn't about her. This is about us. It's about the fact that you saw my professional crisis as an inconvenience and my emotional turmoil as a liability to our brand. It's about the fact that you don't love me. You love the idea of being Mrs. Alex Russo, wife of a star architect, and I don't love you either." The words once spoken were terrifying and liberating. "I was so desperate to build this perfect, successful life that I chose you to be the perfect, successful wife," he continued, the confession pouring out of him. "It wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't true to me. I wasn't looking for a person. I was casting a role, and I am so sorry for that." For the first time since he'd met her, Chloe's mask of perfection shattered completely, her face twisted into a snarl of pure, undiluted rage. "You're sorry?" She spat, her voice low and vicious. "You're destroying my life and you're sorry? I have spent 2 years cultivating our image, building our network, getting us into the right rooms. I put my own ambitions on hold to manage yours, and you're throwing it all away because your pathetic little ex-wife is suddenly in the spotlight? You are weak, Alex. I thought you were a shark, but you're just a pathetic guppy, swimming back to the little pond you came from." The venom in her words was shocking, but it only solidified his resolve. This was the real Chloe, the one who saw relationships as leverage and people as assets. "Maybe I am," he said quietly, "but I'd rather be a guppy in a real pond than a shark in a glass tank, pretending it's the ocean." "Get out," she whispered, her body rigid. "This is my apartment, Chloe." "I want you out," she screamed, her voice cracking. She picked up a heavy crystal vase, a wedding gift they'd received in advance, and hurled it against the wall. It exploded, sending shards of glass and water cascading across the polished hardwood floor. "I want you and your pathetic sentimentality out of my sight." He looked at the shattered glass, then at her, her chest heaving, her beautiful face contorted with fury. There was nothing left to say. The demolition was complete. He walked into the bedroom, pulled out a suitcase, and began to pack, his movements mechanical. He took his clothes, his books, his personal items. He left behind the cufflinks she'd bought him, the expensive watch, all the trappings of the man he had been pretending to be. When he walked back into the living room, suitcase in hand, she was on the phone, her back to him. "Mother?" she said, her voice already transformed back into a smooth, controlled instrument. "There's been a change of plans. No, everything's fine. It's just Alex's firm is transferring him to their London office. It's an incredible opportunity, but the timing is difficult. We've decided to postpone the wedding indefinitely." "Yes, a shame. I'll handle the announcements." He stood there for a moment, listening to her spin a new narrative, effortlessly turning their breakup into another calculated PR move. She was already rebuilding, laying a new foundation over the rubble. He walked out the door and didn't look back. The satisfying click of the lock behind him was the sound of his own liberation. He was homeless, single, and his career was in jeopardy. His perfect life was in ruins, and he had never felt so relieved. 6 months passed. Autumn bled into a brutal Chicago winter, which eventually gave way to the tentative green shoots of spring. For Alex, it was a season of quiet reconstruction. He didn't move to London. He moved into a small, functional apartment in a neighborhood that didn't require a key card for entry. He resigned from his partnership at the firm, taking a senior designer position at a smaller, more innovative company that focused on sustainable, community-oriented projects. The pay cut was significant, but the work felt meaningful for the first time in years. He wasn't building monuments to wealth anymore. He was designing libraries and community centers. He was building places for people, not for magazine spreads. He went to therapy. He sat in a quiet room that smelled faintly of lemon and dust and talked about his father's relentless ambition, his own deep-seated fear of being ordinary, and the colossal arrogance that had led him to treat Elena's heart like a disposable draft. It was grueling, humbling work. It was the hardest thing he had ever built. He rarely heard about Chloe. He knew from a former colleague that she was now dating a hedge fund manager, an older, wealthier man. He imagined she was thriving, her narrative seamlessly rewritten. He felt no anger towards her, only a distant pity for the man who was now cast in her play. He heard about Elena even less. The Vanguard initiative was a quiet, massive success. It was changing laws, funding clinics, and becoming the new standard in pediatric mental health care. Her work spoke for itself. She didn't need the society pages anymore. One breezy Saturday in May, Alex was walking through Lincoln Park, not far from his old apartment. He was sketching in a notebook, an old habit he'd revived, trying to capture the lines of a blossoming magnolia tree. He looked up, and there she was. Elena was walking on a nearby path with Julian Croft. They were holding hands, their fingers loosely intertwined. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a sound he dimly remembered but which now seemed richer, more resonant. Julian was looking at her, not with adoration, but with a deep, easy-going affection. They looked like two people who had found their exact right place in the world, and that place was next to each other. Alex's breath caught in his chest. A familiar pang of loss, of regret, echoed within him. It was the phantom limb of a life he might have had. He felt the sting of his colossal mistake, the full weight of what he had thrown away. But then something else settled over him. It was a quiet, profound sense of peace. He saw her happiness not as a judgment on his failure, but simply as a fact. A good and right fact in the universe. He hadn't destroyed her, as he had once feared. He had only been an obstacle she had, with time and grace, navigated around. Her success wasn't about him. It had never been about him. It was about her. He stayed where he was, partially hidden by the tree, and watched them walk away. He didn't want to talk to her. He didn't want to interrupt that peace. He had nothing to offer her, and he no longer needed anything from her. Not forgiveness, not a second chance. Her happiness was her own, and it was complete without him. That acceptance was his redemption. He looked down at his sketchbook, at the half-finished drawing of the magnolia tree. He thought about the new community center he was designing. It had a small garden planned for the courtyard. He made a note to add a bench, a quiet place for someone to sit. He closed the notebook. The life he had now was smaller than the one he'd designed for himself. It was quieter. It wouldn't be featured in magazines. There would be no galas, no yacht clubs. But it was real. The walls were solid. The foundation was sound. And for the first time in a very long time, Alex Russo felt like he was finally home.